All right, welcome to today's Explainer. When you pull up the news today, US-Iran relations are, well, they're pretty much entirely defined by hostility, heavy economic sanctions, and this constant looming threat of war. But here's the crazy part. They weren't always enemies. In fact, there was a time when these two nations were actually close strategic allies. So how exactly did that happen? How did we go from a strategic partnership to being locked in decades of mutual hostility? How do we end up with this volatile powder keg? Let's trace the historical record.
We are tracing the journey from close allies to the brink of devastating conflict. Because to truly grasp those tense headlines flashing across your screens today, we really have to step back. We need to objectively examine the compounding historical grievances that actually brought us here. You see, this isn't just about what happened yesterday. Actually, it's more like a massive chain reaction of events stretching back well over half a century. If you want to understand the modern geopolitical landscape, you absolutely have to understand the foundation it was built upon. Here is the roadmap for our explainer today. First, the seeds of distrust. Second, revolution and breaking point. Third, proxy battles and tanker wars. Fourth, diplomacy and the nuclear deal. And finally, maximum pressure and escalation. Part 1, the seeds of distrust. Okay, so to find the foundational seeds of this modern distrust, we have to go all the way back to 1953. Here's what happened. Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh decides to nationalize Iran's oil industry. Now, this directly threatened Western economic interests. So in response, the US CIA and British intelligence actually orchestrated a covert coup. They overthrew a democratically elected leader and restored the pro-Western Shah to absolute power. This single massive intervention, it was basically the spark. It initiated a long, incredibly complex chain of broken trust that would totally define the decades to come. Part 2, revolution and breaking points. So the status quo from 1953 held on for quite a while. The Shah rules with an absolute iron fist for 26 years, backed steadily by Washington. But as you can imagine, decades of internal resentment were just boiling right beneath the surface. And by early 1979, that pressure finally erupted into the Islamic Revolution, which actually forced the Shah to flee the country entirely. By mid-1979, Ayatollah Khomeini had established a brand new Islamic Republic. But the real breaking point, the moment that officially killed the US-Iran alliance, happened in late 1979 when Iranian students stormed the US Embassy in Tehran. 444. Just think about that number for a second. During the embassy takeover, 52 Americans were held hostage for 444 grueling days. This wasn't just some brief diplomatic hiccup, right? It fundamentally traumatized the relationship. This hostage crisis was the ultimate breaking point. Whatever partnership had existed under the Shah was completely, irrevocably dead. Part 3, proxy battles and tanker wars. As we roll into the 1980s, things really start accelerating. The diplomatic breakdown turns into indirect and sometimes very direct military warfare. When neighboring Iraq invades Iran, Washington provides both secret and overt support to dictator Saddam Hussein, which naturally escalated the tensions even further. By the late 1980s, this massive land war actually spills outward right into the waters of the Persian Gulf, kicking off the tanker war. And this is where the US Navy begins clashing directly with Iranian forces. The shadow war was quite literally becoming a shooting war. 290. In 1988, that direct contact culminated in a truly devastating tragedy. 290 is the exact number of lives lost when a United States warship in the Persian Gulf mistakenly identified and shot down a civilian airliner, Iran Air Flight 655. All 290 people on board were killed. It was just a horrifying climax to a totally violent decade. If there was literally any shred of mutual understanding or trust left after the hostage crisis, this incident completely shattered it. Part 4, diplomacy and the nuclear deal. Right, so at the turn of the millennium, those visceral, direct military clashes in the Gulf kind of gave way to a new, deeply entrenched geopolitical standoff. On one side, Washington fiercely suspected Iran was actively using its nascent nuclear program to build a bomb, famously labeling them part of the axis of evil. But on the flip side, Tehran steadfastly insisted their program was strictly for generating peaceful energy. This unyielding polarization resulted in years and years of crippling economic sanctions imposed on Iran by the international community. But then that stalemate finally broke. In 2015, we got the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. This was a massive diplomatic breakthrough signed by world powers, where Iran actually agreed to strict, verifiable limits on its nuclear activities, and in exchange, they got sanctions relief. For a brief historic moment, a full-scale war actually seemed preventable. Diplomacy had seemingly triumphed over decades of mutual hostility.
Part 5. Maximum Pressure and Escalation.
Well, unfortunately, that period of diplomatic peace was incredibly short-lived. In 2018, the U.S. officially withdrew from the deal and reinstated heavy sanctions under a new maximum pressure campaign. The shadow war erupted right back into the open. Then, fast forward to January 2020, a U.S. drone strike in Baghdad assassinates General Qasem Soleimani, Iran's top military commander. And just days later, Iran retaliates directly with a barrage of ballistic missiles against U.S. bases. In those few days, these two nations were closer to a direct, full-scale war than at literally any point in their modern history.
And that brings us to today's volatile geopolitical powder keg. The relationship right now is defined by active proxy conflicts spreading all across the Middle East, completely stalled diplomacy that leaves practically zero room for communication, and shifting global alliances operating in the background. Because of all these overlapping factors, the threat of sudden military escalation remains an ever-present reality for us all. A deep-rooted struggle born from decades of intervention, revolution, and broken trust. Ultimately, the core takeaway is this: the tension we see today, it isn't just some product of modern politics or recent administrations. When you see news breaking about U.S.-Iran relations, remember that you are looking at the symptoms of a compounding historical tragedy, a standoff that started all the way back in 1953. We've traced this incredible journey from the 1953 coup through the 1979 revolution, the sheer tragedy of the tanker wars, the fleeting hope of the nuclear deal, right up to the maximum pressure of today. So what do you think is the next chapter in this historic standoff? Can trust ever actually be rebuilt? Or are these two nations locked on a totally unavoidable collision course? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer today. And remember, keep questioning the history behind the headlines.